Welcome to PetroNoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, PetroNoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is PetroNoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to PetroNoia. I am your host, Dan Romito. I am joined today with an incredibly interesting guest. As many listeners know, I read almost everything, sometimes to my detriment, but came across a professor, Jessica Weinkle at UNC Wilmington, and was immediately drawn to her Substack. So I thought it was a great idea to have her on. Jessica, I really appreciate you coming on. Before we get into the fun stuff, you have, from my internet creeping, an incredibly interesting background. So why don't you take however long that you need, frankly, to give everyone a backdrop of how did you get where you're at and what are you currently working on today?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I got involved. Okay. So my background is I started out, in zoology at the University of Texas at Austin. That was my undergrad. And then, life took me a different direction, and I ended up doing a Master's of Arts in Climate and Society at Columbia University. And from there, I started becoming very interested in the relationship between, or what I perceived to be a relationship between the university and the United Nations, right? They're both in New York, but it seemed like there was a lot of movement between professors going back and forth. And I started becoming interested in the role that scientists play in public risk perception of this, that, and the other thing. From there, I started some work on hurricane risk perception, like how do people understand hurricane forecasts? And when I wanted to do my doctorate, my advisor at the time was like, well, why don't you check out this guy, Roger Pilkey Jr. over at University of Colorado Boulder. Roger was nice enough to take me on as a doctoral student.
Okay.
Where I was introduced into like the politics of science and decision making about the production and use of science, better known as science policy. And so I spent 4.5 years studying under him, and then watching what was going on with him in the fray of the blogosphere at the time, and debating with scientists and in politics about like the science of hurricane risk usually.
Okay.
And that sort of led me into eventually this world of the broader world of climate and science and politics and how all these people create the spectacle that has become climate advocacy. And
so you start off presumably 20-year-old, whatever it is, young 20s, Jessica, you're a zoology major in Texas, and then you take this long, windy road to do hurricane forecasting out of Colorado, which is literally the furthest from the oceans. That's okay. And then you end up at UNC Wilmington, essentially learning and discussing and writing about the politics of science.
Yeah. So I had my dissertation was looking at the politics of like rate making in Florida, windstorm occurrence rate making, which involved a lot of this sort of like how did people understand their rates and the fighting about the rates and how it ended up linking into climate advocacy politics, and then the scientists moving back and forth between the insurance companies and science and then out in the public sphere started talking about like these huge hurricane risks, which would inevitably kind of feed into a public acceptance of their rates. And there are real reasons why rates were going up as far as like the business of insurance and
Right.
measuring risk and all that. But it became like a symbolically like useful means to get people on board of accepting larger rates. It's like, oh, it's because of the climate change, not because of the building going on down here, or right. And then in the advocacy realm, they could say, but look at all this climate change, and this is life under climate change where you're having problems with the insurance regime. And so it went back and forth. Anyways, so from there, I started talking a little bit about basically not regulatory capture, but like an aspect of capture where we were, because of the way insurance is done or way it's done, like you've got your regulators dependent on the information coming from the insurance industry, which is fine, except the insurance industry is then also heavily involved with producing research that feed into. So it became like this circular thing.
Right. You're essentially saying in terms of like checks and balances where, you'd want sort of the pros and the cons. There's not necessarily any incentive for the insurance company to present research that would necessarily go against their better interests, better economic interests.
Right.
Right.
That's a really good way of saying it.
Okay.
And so that's anyways, that's what I ended up.
Was that the impetus to the blog? Because I definitely want to get into that, but
Yeah.
you have a Substack, which is great, but what was the driving, was that the driving motivation to get that thing rolling?
Yes and no. Like if you know the saying like clear writing is clear thinking made visible.
I've never heard that, but that actually makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah. So one is taking in all this information and it's got to go somewhere. Right. And the value of putting it online is it makes you accountable, right? So somebody else is going to read it and then they're going to say, but you said. And so you want to make sure, or I want to make sure that what I say is accurate. And so that was pretty much the impetus, is like, how do I make sense of what's going on in my mind? And then it's useful, right? Like it draws people in, it draws people in and it shares like what's going on. And so there's accountability both ways, right? Where you're like creating accountability for what the organizations and the networks that you're seeing or I'm seeing. And then also accountability for me to kind of like keep it honest, because I don't want somebody coming back and saying like you said, and not being able to back it up.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I think, one of the things, once again, you referred to me by my good friend and fellow Floridian, Tommy Pyle. The part that you're writing about regulatory capture, or once again, I know not the textbook definition of that, but for lack of a better term, let's just call it a variation or an adjacency, if you will, of regulatory capture, is how the tech bros, particularly a couple individual tech bros, are gaining more and more control of the environmental NGO world, and it's leading towards this very interesting dynamic where environmental NGOs aren't necessarily as focused on the environment as most people who just look at the name would think they would. The research that you've done into that, once again, I'm going what I've read off your blog, but would love for you to expand upon how you're analyzing and evaluating that particular dynamic, because as we've been promoting on our front, and this is not novel anymore, like this is just common sense at this point, is the future economic prowess of the United States and frankly the global economy largely rests upon how savvy and profitable generative AI becomes, and the fact that you have this convergence between the technology space and the energy space. That is a real thing that's going on in real time. And I was fascinated by how you are breaking down the relationship between the tech bros and let's call it the environmental bros.
So, and then apologies. then the question would be?
The question is, yeah, you basically say in so many words that the tech bros are increasingly the primary funders of the environmental NGOs, and there's a variation of capture taking place there.
I think I don't know that I would say that if they're the ones holding the money, they're going to necessarily become involved in all of these issues, and environmental being one of them.
Okay.
What happened with climate, I think, is that it's so model heavy. So climate change research or climate anything, it's so model heavy. It's also very data generative.
Right.
And there's like a ton of data there. And so if you're into that sort of thing, if you're into creating technologies and creating new models and creating predictions, right, then it's like a lot to work with. And then you can sell these larger ideas of modeling the world, and we're going to predict everything that's ever going to happen in these like large Earth systems, right? They're called like digital twins. And so I presumably, if you're in that line of business, if you're looking for places to put money, create new technologies that will make money, then it's something to do. And this showed up, I think, most notably with the $1 billion that Doerr gave Stanford.
Yep.
Where he said climate science is the next computer science. And so it's just like, that's what your thing is, AI models, data, and you got a bunch of money, you're going to go where there's data, and climate science has always been super heavy in models. And I think really like the advancement of climate science itself aligned with model advancement. And in some ways, like the increasing promise, like, oh, if we can figure it out, we can predict better, we can, it's part of like also getting investment into advancing computer science. And so there is some like legitimacy to the two. It just depends on like, is that what we want? Is that what we need? Is that really the problem with climate change and energy, right? Like, I don't know that prediction is really.
What?
I don't think that is. It's the energy source.
Okay. Interesting. And then do you think that there's a conflict of interest in terms of the where the funding has come from, or where the funding is coming from, or like how do you think about that?
The conflicts of interest show up. So like, if you're just like tech bro, bunch of money, right? Like there's no really conflict of interest there. If you're a scientist going between that industry and science and academics, not really being clear about your either your non-financial interest in it all, right? Like you want to advocate for action, or you're making money off the whole thing. Like maybe you're a science advisor to a startup, maybe hold equity shares. I don't know how that's done, but if you're making money that way and you're not disclosing it, then that's a problem. And that's a big problem, I think, in climate science.
I guess that was my question. So forgive my ignorance when it comes to climate science, in terms of like, I just read the papers. I don't really like do a deep dive on who's writing the stuff. I probably should, like, but I'm obsessed with the content. Is that a current, as you see it, issue in the literature? It was like lack of disclosure in terms of like, what is the financial incentives behind writing this paper?
The financial and advocacy incentives. Yeah. So like financial, they call them financial and non-financial conflicts of interest.
Okay.
Non-financial conflicts of interest has long been like, that's not really a thing. But it is a thing when things have become so fierce, politicized, and polarized. And where is the limit to what you have to disclose?
Yeah.
I don't know. But usually also,
What's the state? Sorry to cut you off. What's the state of disclosure? So let's just start with what do you have to disclose today?
so in medicine, you have to disclose a lot.
Yeah.
And I think more recently, that's what I've become more of an advocate for, is that in medicine, they've done, I mean, it's not perfect, but they have databases, they follow people's disclosures. There's a professional norm to disclose. You're expected to disclose. And because of that, nobody's really like shamed for it. But you have a better understanding of where the scientific article, whatever, came from, the context for the creation of that information. And then you can also start doing meta-analyses. Like, so when people are funded by X type of organization, how is that correlated to the outcomes that they find?
Interesting.
But that is not well practiced outside of the biomedical sciences. And it's certainly not practiced in the climate sciences very well at all. You're saying a little bit more of it these days, but not a whole lot, not as much as should.
Well, this is actually, I mean, it's a timely event. Like, obviously, we're coming off the passing of the big, beautiful bill, where, as it relates to energy, the big, beautiful bill, for all intents and purposes, basically eliminated the vast majority of solar and wind and really propped up natural gas and nuclear. And there is this, and once again, we're 3-4 days in it, whatever it is, less than a week. There's scientists who are very adamant about solar and wind, saying this is like the worst thing ever. And then there's scientists on the nuclear and the natural gas side of like, no, like this is the best thing ever. And it really creates a lot of confusion. Although, like, look, once you do the work, I mean, I am very clear that nuclear and natural gas is the path forward, like that. And we can get into that conversation. But I think what you're underscoring or what you're saying underscores the dilemma that we have. It's like, well, what is what, right? If we just look at it objectively, you can find the same amount of papers that advocate for wind and solar that you can for that for natural gas and nuclear. And you're saying there's like no like rule infrastructure that would highlight the financial incentives associated with who's writing what?
I think that everybody knows they're supposed to be disclosures. Yeah. I think everybody expects proper disclosures, but there's not a norm of disclosure. And there's
sort of like speeding in the suburbs, right? The speed limit's 35, but everyone goes 45 because they're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, because everybody else is going 45. But I start disclosing, I know that guy's not disclosing. So it's just nobody like ever thinks about it.
Okay.
And I think that's a problem, but that's a professional norm problem. I don't know that you can or ought to regulate from above. So,
well, for example, this healthcare, you say this is like common practice. Are they required to do it, or are they just abide by a different set of etiquette?
Question. I think to some extent they are, because there was the Sunshine Law at some point that required a database. There's some sort of formal law that requires central reporting so that it's accessible to whoever wants to do the research on who gets funded by what pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exist outside of that.
Interesting
realm.
Yeah, it is. Like we came out with this paper and we give the presentation nationally, frankly. We give it to policymakers, we give it to investors. We frankly give it to anybody that wants to listen. But it's the tech bros are calling the energy shots. We say that energy policy in the United States is largely going to be influenced by how it can foster the expansion of the technology sector. Even though like NVIDIA, I think, just hit $4 trillion market cap. But in that presentation, once again, it's charts, graphs, tables. We stick to like publicly available sources of data. One of the things that, once again, I fell out of my chair, figuratively, of course, when I was going through that exercise, was the greatest amount of emissions comes from the power industry. And who utilizes the most power? Well, it's going to be technology, and it's not even going to be close. But when you have the emissions discussion, particularly from an impact and a policy perspective, that is one of the dots that is never connected. Like everyone's always surprised, like, oh, like tech uses, and then once again, it becomes so intuitive. But potentially, do you think that's one of the results as to this lack of sort of disclosure, that because tech finances a lot of NGOs, environmental NGOs, that there's not a vested interest to kind of just highlight the tech space?
I've never thought about it that way.
Okay.
Well, it's more of like
No.
really, yeah, no, because I mean, this definitely starts to bleed into like areas that I'm not 100% on.
Okay.
Like you're really talking about the energy, and we need the energy for whatever we need it for. And if we decide that we need the energy for the AI, as you're saying, like this is a real thing, like the two things merging together and be the economic, whatever, the thing that pushes the economy forward now, well, that matters. And it doesn't really. So the question is about the energy still, though, not necessarily the AI, because other people have decided that this is what we're going to do. This is what we have to do. I mean, I have my own personal preferences about computing and all that. But my understanding, my sort of novice understanding, at least in this regards, is the AI, whether or not we like it in our day-to-day lives, it's really important on like a national security front. And so from that perspective, it matters little whether or not we want this thing that's sucking up energy. It's like, if we care about our national security, if we care about being involved geopolitically, then like we use energy, right? Like, however, whatever, we got to get that energy out so that we can do this thing so that we can protect our nation. And like, but that's a very, like, I don't study international relations, at least, and I'm not a foreign sort of policy person, but that's my understanding of it, and that's what makes it relevant. Like the energy and the computing go hand in hand, and so, but for a broader, a bigger issue, a political issue,
right? And then, so on the aspect of the climate data, the climate science data, you bring up a really good point. Like, are we working with really good data sets? Is there a way? I've heard from civil engineers in particular, like, once again, like 100-year flood data isn't necessarily great, right? It's something to work with, but it's not as expansive or comprehensive that we like. And I think a lot of times, like, and I'm guilty of this, you hear data set and you immediately, like I'm not saying the integrity when I'm quality, I mean like the duration, the extent, the consistency, all the attributes of like a quality data set. Is that in place with climate data?
So let me talk about hurricane data, because I'm most familiar with that, like as far as like the of it. So, and this is sort of intuitive. Anything older is going to have less detail to it. Anything newer. Right? So like I got a chance to tour the National Hurricane Center once.
Okay.
It was like if there was a molecule that moved, it looked like they knew about it. Right? Like the number of information, the amount of information that they were bringing in at any one time was just, I mean, incredible. And they had all the screens and everything like that. It's awesome. 100 years ago, that was not the case. And so if you look at hurricane forecasts from 100 years ago, it was like some guy, the meteorologist in Cuba, sent a telegram to the people in Miami and said, hey, you just had a bad storm. I think it's going your way. They're watching the barometer. Right? Like at 11 o'clock in the midnight, they go up to like the tallest building in town and they hang up a flag and they say, there's a hurricane. Like, it's like we are worlds apart from that. And so when they talk about like data being not ideal, it's not ideal, right? Like, especially when you're looking at something like a hurricane where it's not like your precipitation data, which you're collecting every day. You were collecting it every day in the 1800s too. Like, and so is today's precipitation data more accurate than back then? Sure. But like, whatever, you're collecting it all the time. Hurricanes, floods, stuff like that, like they're rarer, and so you're not collecting that data all the time. However, like even a flood, like if it came up to X amount on the wall, you can see that. You can see that whether that was in the 1800s or you could see that today, right? So like, we have more observation, we have more detail, but it's not like, I'm reluctant to say that like you can't do anything. We are better at what we do today than we were.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's really fair point. Is like you can't attack necessarily the quality per se because you're at the mercy of what technologies were available. And once again, it seems like the technologies, as it relates to hurricanes in particular, really got savvy. Is that would have been like the mid 90s? Is that fair? After Hurricane Andrew, is that sort of like?
Well, no, that's
no
from people that all into their predictive models, like their catastrophe modeling, not necessarily forecast modeling, but catastrophe.
Okay.
So that changed the ball game. But what ends up happening, the reason I'm so like hemming and hawing about this is what ends up happening is that people say, oh, our data quality is better today than it used to be, and therefore we should just discard that whole data set. And so in hurricane science, they'll say that you'll have different people believing different things. Like, oh, we shouldn't use the data set before the 1940s when we started doing aircraft reconnaissance. You have other people saying we shouldn't use the data set before the 1960s when we started having satellites. You have other people saying, oh, no, the cutoff really should be the 80s where we can observe the entire Earth and all the basins and all that. And then you have other people that say, at least for the North Atlantic and for the United States, and what most people will say, is that really the data set from the 1900s onward, 1900 onward for landfalling storms is pretty good. Like if there was a storm that made landfall, we recorded it, we have data on it, we should use it. So when you truncate the data at any given point, because the frequency of hurricanes is not consistent over time, when you truncate it at any given point, it starts to mess with trends. And you can see that, I think, in other data sets as well. And that's why, like, I'm very, like, there's a lot of nuance around these data sets. So it's true that our observations are better today than they were. We have way more detail. But that doesn't mean, like, you just cut off the data set wherever it was you, and then you say, okay, we're just going to look at this now. And that's when you start getting a lot of that, like, that is part of the climate advocacy game, where data sets get truncated, and people start doing weird things based on their belief, their values about it.
When it gets truncated, does that mean that it has a higher propensity to underestimate or overestimate? Like, or is it truncating where it's like, I mean, data mining in that you're sort of pursuing a desired outcome and that's the way to do it? But what are some of the adverse consequences of truncating it?
If you truncate at 70 in the 70s or people will do like 1970 or 1980, it'll create an increasing trend in frequency. And
what about intensity?
I think in both.
Okay.
Double check intensity, but I think and so that's the problem. And the reason that happens is because 70 was a low point for hurricane frequency.
Okay.
And so
why would you pick? Are you arbitrarily picking 1970? Or are you just giving an example, or why do people really do pick 1970?
No. It's a real thing. I think it's like somewhere in the 70s.
Why is it just because of the technology that was available?
So there's different beliefs about it. So, like the Earth is a complicated place, which is why this promise that like we're going to we're going to model the entire Earth and everything that it does is like, okay, and whatever. So there's if you look at the whole record of hurricane activity, it increases and it decreases and it increases. There's a multi-decadal oscillation, right? Like it changes over time. And there's there's all sorts of theories about why that happens. But the 70s was a low point. And so if you cut it off at the 70s and start there, then you will necessarily end up with an increasing trend. Right. One of the reasons people do it is because of data quality. They'll make a data quality argument. Another reason people do it is they'll say, okay, well, the reason it was so low then was because of, what are they called? Aerosols. And once we put in place better aerosol laws and we started controlling the particulate in the atmosphere, then we ended up with more regular hurricane activity. And therefore, all that stuff in the past doesn't really matter because it doesn't.
When you say we, you in the United States or the globe?
Primarily in the United States, I think. I think other people started controlling their aerosols too.
Okay.
And so people come up with all sorts of explanations as to why they should cut their data in different places. But then the larger discussion of who they work for starts to matter as to who benefits from truncating the data at any one place.
Okay. Who benefits from truncating it starting in the 70s?
Anybody that wants to argue that the hurricane risk is more than it was in the past.
Okay. Objectively, and once again, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. Is hurricane risk more prevalent today than the 70s, or like is it the same? Like relatively speaking, like where are we at?
The long-term trend is that there is no trend. So if you start in like 1900 and you move forward, like it's all kind of the same.
It's all kind of. Can you make the argument? So it's interesting playing devil's advocate, and this is fresh in my brain. There is an economist, once again, so full disclosure, economist, who fully admitted, by the way, that when the model doesn't work, it just doesn't work. And you're like, oh, okay. Anyway, he was making the argument that frequency has stayed basically the same, but the intensity of the storm has been increased. And the sort of counterpoint, or just devil's advocate, just for the sake of debate, was, well, you have more people living in hurricane prone areas probably than any other time in history. And not only are they living there, this is much more affluent people, relatively speaking. So it's, much more bigger homes, much more bigger condos, much more bigger everything, much more expensive cars, blah, 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 blah. But also the component of there just wasn't a way to measure it as accurately, intensity wise, back in the day than it is today. So maybe it's understated, maybe it's overstated. Like, we don't know. If you were sitting next to me while this economist was giving a spiel, would you be nudging me, like laughing, or would you be like nodding your head and be like, oh yeah, like we're
So there's no long-term trend.
Okay.
If you want to, it depends on why you're looking at it, right? Like, or how you're looking at it. And if you're looking at it for the reasons of like how society is impacted by it, then you're looking at damages, and you're seeing, like what your economist was saying, was that there's a lot more people that are being affected by these storms, and is causing damages that are far higher.
Yep.
And then as well, when you normalize for population change and inflation and wealth, you again don't see a trend.
Okay.
And so while scientists may debate as to different things that they see in the details of the actual storms, and they're looking at the data and they're like, well, maybe it's increasing a little bit here, maybe not, maybe are they going slower? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. There's a lot of room to debate there, and that's fine. That's what scientists are supposed to do. But when you're trying to better understand how it's impacting populations and how it's impacting the cost of insurance and how it's impacting that sort of thing. That is overwhelmingly how we design our societies. And so you can fight about the minutia. Like, is it a couple miles per hour stronger?
Yeah, right. It's a hurricane.
Yeah, it's a hurricane. And where it starts to, yeah, okay, I'll just leave it at that.
No, like this is sort of like what you're in Robert Bryce talks about this, right? He talks about this climate industrial complex, right? His term, right? And does that mean, like, in many ways you see sort of this, and once again, I'm not putting words in your mouth, so correct me, like almost biased, right? Because of the source or the incentive to write that this is playing out in predominantly the market, but a lot of it's playing out in the insurance market.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that the details of the hurricanes get debated so fiercely is because it plays a role in how you construct visions of hurricane risk for financial reasons, whether it's rate making or investment purposes and all that.
Okay.
And so a little tweak here might give you a different loss distribution, maybe. Mm-hmm. And so that is where it starts to matter. And then it starts to potentially play out in rate making. That gets, again, so, but then that feeds into, again, who's anybody working for? Because if you're starting to talk about like, the hurricanes are getting worse, and this is climate change, but in the background, you are working for an insurance-linked security firm, and you're responsible for creating the event catalog for their cat bond that they're selling or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, that starts to matter because you're starting to make public claims that are getting involved in our politics and in influencing our energy policy, because what you really want to do is win the next contract or buys your firm, and it's a messy business what's going on in there.
Yeah, look, there's a variety of, I'm going somewhere with this, by the way, so just bear with me. There's a variety of very smart, very educated people I respect who are younger, who have told me flat out, like, they're either, long-term relationship or engaged or recently married, whatever. They have been very clear and adamant that they are not having kids because of climate change. And once again, like, I'm in no position to judge anybody's lifestyle, but I would, certainly tell them that if you're not going to have kids, like, climate change should not play into that equation, right? Or if it does, it should be very minimal. It shouldn't be like the reason why. But, when you kind of just sit back and listen, they talk about all this analysis that's giving them the impression that climate change is this existential threat that's going to wipe us off the face of the planet. And my thing was like, it's a thing. Like, clearly, stuff changes, but I like to think that we have the capability to adapt and to be very super innovative and creative and figure out solutions to it. And then when you say that to them, they're like, they just can't get their head around it. And it's because they've been inundated with all this negative analysis, where the competing or the rebutting analysis, I'm like, yeah, there's like these 5 problems, whatever they are, but here's like the 5 potential solutions, and actually we could figure this out. They're never presented with like the more positive aspect. It just seems all doom and gloom. Do you think that will change, or is there analysis that actually exists on like, yeah, this is a problem, but hey, like, there's a variety of solutions that we could entertain?
Have you ever read Hannah Richie's work over at
No.
Our World in Data?
Oh, Our World in Data. Yeah, I love Our World in Data. That's Hannah Richie? Okay.
Yeah. So Hannah Richie does I don't know, she's like head of data or something, but she has a book. It's on my desk, Not the End of the World, which is all about that.
Okay.
Um,
What's the gist of the book other than saying it's not?
goes through all these parameters regarding all these issues regarding the environment, and saying, pointing out where we've had a lot of success as a global society and improved global situation. Right, I had mentioned the aerosols before, like clean that up, right? Like we decided that was a problem, and we put in some regulations, and we chugged along, and we resolved that.
Yeah.
And so, and we see that in other places, right? Fisheries, where is it perfect? No, but we have had like tremendous global improvement in the way that we manage our fisheries. And so, yeah, like there's a big effort to try and change the way that we talk about the environment, and the way that we talk about environmental or policies. So it's not necessarily like really environmental policies. You're talking about industrial policies that are better for everyone. It gets us what we want, and it without the negative impacts on the environment. And that's the draw with Breakthrough, right? So like I'm a fellow over there.
Mhm.
Where
Well, just real quick before you can explain what Breakthrough is, because I think that's a really good point.
I'm always reluctant to talk for them because they do such a good job talking.
If you had to give the elevator pitch, what would it be?
So the Breakthrough Institute is an environmental think tank that focuses on industrial policy, and their approach is that the environmental benefits that we want is sort of an outcome of our industrial policies, and you can't sacrifice wealth and well-being. You pursue the environmental outcomes that you want through producing wealth and well-being for society. And so one does not say, okay, we need to shut down emissions. We need to defossilize the economy, which was the more recent. Anyways, you say this climate change thing is a problem. How can we produce energy cheaply while also having maybe reducing our emissions?
Right.
So, which you were talking about nuclear and LNG, and like that's a way to do it. You cannot undermine the economy, and you cannot undermine everybody's way of life.
That's the great irony. It's like I think we're getting to a point. Sorry to cut you off because you triggered me. We're getting to a point where there's a growing consensus that acknowledges that nuclear probably is the best solution, right? Emissions free and all the jazz that goes along with it. But then what's one of the bottlenecks? What's one of the impediments outside of the regulatory thing, which plays into the main bottleneck? It's ungodly expensive, right? And no one is necessarily willing to leverage the entirety of their balance sheet, knowing full well that the payback is 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. And people are like, well, why does that matter? It's like, because that plays into the argument, which I share. It's like, you don't undermine the future economic prowess of your nation to battle climate change. Because if you don't have that excess prosperity, then you have no money to do anything, right? It's you just kind of sit around, you're bankrupt. But it takes a lot of cash. And how are you going to generate that cash? Well, you have to raise the incremental wealth of your nation to afford the ability to scale nuclear. And it's like, yeah, like the economic prosperity has to be priority number one, because then everything falls into chaos. And anyway, I wanted to get that out because I really appreciate a lot of the stuff that the Breakthrough group does. But, carry on. I just wanted to.
No, I mean, I 100% agree. And I think they would agree too. Like, wealth is a means towards these things. Like, wealth gives people the opportunity to then focus on the environment. Like, if you're just struggling to get by, like, the last thing it's just not.
The single mom on the south side of Chicago is not tracking climate change trends. She's making sure that she can afford her bills.
Yeah, I mean, climate change is seriously something to sit around and ponder because you have the time and money to sit around and ponder.
Right.
Like, market-wise,
Totally.
we've got other things to do.
What do you see? I mean, do you see that argument trend in your favor, or is it still somewhat of an uphill battle to win hearts and minds on that front?
As which one? The wealth thing?
Economic prosperity first.
I mean, I don't think that that's a hard sell. Like, that's not something that people don't want, right? Like, what America doesn't want economic prosperity, or what anybody, like, not just America, or
Well, I would push back. I mean, Europe is knowingly shooting themselves in the foot, right? They are lessening their reliance on fossil fuels, and the economic contraction that they're experiencing right now is real, right?
real. So I'm always sort of struck by like who's doing this, right? Like, so here there's this narrative about that's coming from climate activism that's like very doom and gloom. Earth's gonna tip over into this catastrophe state, which is what is pushed forward. And yet I haven't met a whole lot of people that live their life around this. And it may be because of where I live in North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's very purple. Like, even in my environmental classes, maybe more at the undergraduate level, but at the graduate level, like, they're not worried about the world ending tomorrow. It's not like.
Have you met the degrowthers? Have you met those guys? I say those guys, like the degrowth crew.
Oh, I mean, I'm familiar with that argument. And so what you're saying about what's going on in Europe, there's also like they're having their own political problems too.
Yeah.
And so it is hard. I don't understand. Maybe it's my own ignorance. Like or my lack of savvy here. Like, I don't understand why this is a narrative that is not easier to push aside, because it's not something that is mainstream in the population. It's like a very elite thing, it would seem. And when you see like where it's being generated in Europe, like it's like select institutions, select people that happen to be very influential also in the climate narrative and the climate science community. But like I don't know that it's I mean, and maybe it's my ignorance about European politics, but I don't really, it's not a mass, it's not like a common man's thing. So why does it hang out?
I am certainly not an expert on European politics. I dabble. I certainly speak there. I'm a member of a oil and gas advocacy group, Pragma, that is based out of the UK, and very focused on EU policy. So by proxy, and I'm getting information in an adjacent manner. And frankly, a lot of our clients are doing business in the EU. But I think you sort of answered your own question, is that it's very top of the food chain. It's a very top of the food chain consideration. And you, for the most part, particularly in the European political environment, have the upper echelon of society, particularly socioeconomically speaking, calling the shots. So if it's a thing for them, it's a thing for everybody. It trickles down. I think that's beginning to flip. I get the sense that it's beginning to change a little bit. We've spoken to investors that you bring up Europe, they're gone. They're lost between their immigration policies and then their energy policies, and then just, poor economic decisions. Like, they have a massive hole that they have to dig out of. But bringing it back to your point earlier, it's like, that's a really good case study. That's a really good example of what happens when you take, I guess, climate science, whatever you want to call it, too far. Like, there's certainly a place for it, but when you go too far, it's like the same analogy with like working out. If I ran a marathon every day, I'd die, right? I would literally, break my shins and have a heart attack and die. But it's technically working out. Like, I mean, I don't run, but I'll work out, but I'm not running a marathon every day. That's sort of the analogy that I make.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I agree. I'm not quite sure where. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, there was a report that was submitted to, or actually in May it was submitted, and then the Human Rights Council met on it. So this is the United Nations Human Rights Council.
Okay.
And there's a history of problems with the Human Rights Council and the way that member states basically create blocks in order to prevent investigation into their own countries and but what was submitted was this report on defossilizing the global economy, and part of it was defossilizing knowledge, which was a larger argument for criminalizing fossil fuel misinformation, quote unquote, criminalizing advertising by the fossil fuel industry, restricting their lobbying abilities. And it was submitted by an Italian legal scholar that works in Scotland, I want to say.
Okay.
And it was discussed. And then it was like, okay, well, that's nice. Let's discuss it 2 years from now as well. And it's like, why? Like, what is going on in geopolitics that other nations are sitting around going, yes, this is an idea. Let's discuss it.
It's trickled down into the United States. I want to say that Ted Cruz had a exchange with a guy who is proposing criminal or some sort of criminal implications for fossil fuel executives, right? Like, which is laughable and ridiculous across the board. But the guy sits there and he states his argument like he's, making some sort of like very intuitive, very well thought out case. And, you can tell that he believes in it, or at least he gives the impression that he does. But, I go back to what I just said on Europe. We don't have to guess what would potentially happen if you took this too far. You have a glaring example literally right in front of you of the implications and the consequences when you take anything too far, right? And that it's in Europe, and that just doesn't resonate to the extent that I thought it would in the United States. It's like, yeah, like Europe's trying this and turns out it's not a great idea. So why would we do it?
So I think, but this gets into the conflicts of interest, right? So like, I think I should also say, since I talked about conflicts of interest, like I have also done paid consulting for issues related to conflicts of interest and issues related to this. But it's not the 2 and 2 is not put together, right? Where whether this goes back to what we were talking about like a while ago, or my general feeling that like Congress has disappeared from the conversation.
Yeah.
So much has fallen on the courts, or it's just a product of our contemporary politics and sort of like the way that our information travels. But a lot of what happens is being spun by litigation and trying to like win the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
And so you see it in PFAS, you see it in this stuff. And so you have people that are either want to get in the game or are in the game, and they're spinning out science, they're spinning out opinions, they're spinning out these law opinions. And it's all being revolved around this idea that you can fund adaptation by just suing the fossil fuel industry. And and if you happen to get what you want, you will basically bankrupt them. Yeah. The world will move towards solar. I just like.
But once again, so real, I agree with everything you're saying. So when I say once again, you're triggering me because I'm living through this right now. When you look at, for example, there's an example of what you just laid out. When you look at the abandoned well issue in the United States, so we have, give or take, 3 to 3.5 million abandoned wells that are leaking a substantial amount of methane per year. I mean, it's not nothing. It's substantial, and obviously, the vast majority of these wells are in lower socioeconomic areas of the United States. But when when you get into like, well, how do we solve this? There is a contingent, a very loud and influential contingent, predominantly NGO, environmental NGOs, not all of them, but they make up that contingent, that will say, well, we need to sue the oil and gas businesses who are responsible for this. And you're like, okay, like on the surface, that's at least initially a logical approach. But then you look at the history of the wells. Most of these wells, not all, but I would say the vast majority of them are wells from like the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. And the companies that are responsible for them are no longer around. And you're like, well, why are they no longer around? It's because they went bankrupt, right? So to your point, if you're going to sue companies into bankruptcy, what money are you going to have to fix the problem? Because even the lawsuit money, the reward money that you would have, that might plug 5-10% of the wells. And then what? Then there's no companies to produce oil and gas, which for the foreseeable future we need. There's no money to remediate it, or there's very little money left over to remediate it. And you're stuck with the problem. And like, no, like we need to sue. Like, I don't know if that's because we just become such a litigious society, but there's better solutions. And once again, we're working on that. We actually are really, really close on, something with the carbon markets. But the point is, like, top down over litigious overreaction doesn't really provide solutions. It's like free market, bottom up entrepreneurial efforts that require money and return. And the only way to get access to money is offer those giving you the money a return. Otherwise, why would they give it to you in the first place? They just wouldn't. No one would, even anyone who's anti-capitalist. And for whatever dumb reason, like that just hasn't resonated with opponents, which leads me to just believe that they're just against it for the sake of being against it. They're, in other words, they're not in the solution business. They're in the like, I just don't like you business.
Sure.
You're like, get me off the podcast right now.
I believe it. I don't even know that. I mean, you might know better than I do because you're interacting with these people regularly. But like, I don't know that anybody looks at it that far. I think that there is an immediate, I need to pay the bills. Yeah. So in order to pay the bills, I need a job. I need my consulting contracts. I need whatever. And like, look, I can do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of
what happens, and that's as far as anybody's thinking about it.
But like, so like in the interest of solutions, like if you were, dictator Weinkle for a day, how would you solve it? Like, what would you do?
Solve what?
The eliminating the conflict, or is that just something that we got to figure out a better way of managing?
The conflicts of interest for scientists,
right,
and scholars, academics.
Yes.
I think it needs, so my thinking is that it needs to be picked up by the professional organization. So let's see, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, the Geophysical, what are they? American Geophysical Union. They need to take it up at their conventions, in their editorial groups. Like they need to start pushing it out as a concern, and that it needs to be addressed. Science, whether that's the editors at the journals, whether that's the universities, like people are involved in the universities, and this goes into a bigger issue for the state of science in the United States. But like, it can't be something that is for Democrats, and not only that, but science for Democrats, and then you need to believe these things.
Yeah.
Like that can't be the case. And so,
do you think the stuff that's coming out of COVID is making that better?
Better? There's something that came out of COVID.
Well, I mean, look, obviously we look at it now, and COVID, the analysis on COVID, like for example, like the 6 feet distance, like turns out that was just arbitrarily put in place, right? There was no scientific, as far as I know, no scientific analysis. It's like, oh yeah, like, 5 foot 10 inches away, you're screwed. 6 foot 1 inch away, you're fine. Yeah. Like none of that was ever put in place. And so like, I think everyone is sort of having most reasonable people are having second thoughts on, well, this is what quote unquote science is telling me. I would like more information, right, on both ends, both pro and against, so I can just make an educated decision on my own as a reasonable and pragmatic adult.
People, the level of distrust is such that people were listening to who they trusted, and if they were Democrats, they trusted people that.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's the problem with science, right? Like,
And tribes, right? Yeah, it's a link to tribalism.
It has become too party aligned, or like there's too much. I don't know how to say it. It's like
it's tribalistically aligned as opposed to just objective.
Is it as bad as, I mean, is there like some sort of woke mind virus? Like, I don't think so. But I do think that not only by polling, but also my general experience, like the faculty lean left, and maybe that's fine, but it can't be then that is turned into that the Republicans on the right are bad by just virtue of that line of thinking.
Right.
And I think that's what has come about. And maybe I think the environmental sector has, or the environmental area of study has been a bit part of that, because of their view towards, however it happened, but their view towards Republicans. And
well, you're in the mix. Is it getting better? Presumably you're a little bit more right than left. I'm just listening to hear you talk. Is it getting better, like for you, or is it like, what's your experience?
My experience is that it's that the whole thing is too advocacy oriented. So like, I don't know. I think I'm probably like, depending on the issue, I'm right or left. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really know what these things mean anymore, frankly. But what I see in my students is that it's not necessarily knowledge oriented. I don't want to put it on my students, but it's not necessarily like knowledge oriented. It's advocacy oriented. How can I use this science to advance what I want?
Yeah.
Rather than, and it's hard to orient them towards a more like, okay, well, what's the public good? Not like what you think. What that's like, right? And reorienting students, and that's my job as an educator, is helping people think in a better, more constructive way. But it's hard. It's hard to like. It's hard to reorient them in towards like, okay, well, what is the policy goal? What did Congress say was the goal for the United States that we? Right. It's like, why would I look there? I'm like, why wouldn't you look there? Like, right? Like that's.
No, I hear you. I mean, you're in the thick of it more. Like I moonlight as an adjunct at Marquette, right? And I was giving a presentation to the students, and I had this kid, and good for him, like literally fact checking me on every single thing related to what he did not like. Now, to his credit, he was a little bit open-minded, but and this is an entirely different podcast segment that would take 5 hours, but the art of constructive thinking it's been lost for the last decade. Like it's just something that we don't embrace as much as like, and I'm not even that old. Like when I was in the college, it was like when I went to Chicago, they were like, we will beat you over the head with the magic wand that facilitates critical thinking. Like at the end of the day, like even if you come up with the most ridiculous idea, as long as you follow this constructive process, you should be fine. And I just, once again, it sounds like my kids are like, you sound like a boomer. And I'm not. I'm a millennial. I'm not a boomer. But they're like, oh, you sound like a boomer. I'm like, no, like you have to take the pros and then you have to make the cons. And then you have to weigh that as an adult and make a decision based upon that. Not like Bloods versus Crips and like whatever the Bloods do, I'm going to just protect the Bloods. It doesn't work like that. Unless you're a Blood or a Crip, I would imagine. I'm not a Blood or a Crip.
I'd say I had the most success when I was really happy with one of my classes. I was really happy with the way it went. And it started with like, okay, well, we're actually going to read the IPCC report. And not only to cover, because there's like too much there.
Yeah.
But we looked at pieces of it, and they were really surprised to find that the message that they're hearing constantly in the media is like not what is actually in the report.
Right.
And that like really opened up space to discuss.
Yeah.
Was not like, if I just said this is the way it is, was different from them having to go in and see it for themselves. What is the, let's say, quote unquote consensus statement? And that those statements are very nuanced. Very nuanced. And now, I mean, yeah.
Do you think there's a correlation? And I'm sure there is, but once again, like, just your opinion, is there a correlation between the fact that government has an all-time low approval rating, cable news has an all-time low approval rating, and then that everyone has sort of jumped, like they're more inclined to be more tribalistic? Are those things? There has to be some sort of connection between those three things, right?
My understanding is yes. So if people don't, I couldn't cite you the scholars on this. Yeah, like when people start losing trust in government, they become more identity oriented. They become more tribalistic.
Yeah.
Because there is not that central thing to not necessarily like have faith in, but they start questioning everything. And I mean, that's not to say that we should trust government. Like, I was not raised to trust government, but
once again, I'm not implying that either.
Right. Like, but I was not, nor was I raised to like be that like conspiracy oriented either. Like, so there was like a fine line, right? Where you should, there was a faith in the accountability, that there is accountability mechanisms, that our government strives for transparency. Where they're not transparent, that we can go out there, we can demand transparency from them. Right. That it's democratic, right? We can demand things, and the government would be responsive to our demands.
Like, journalism kicks in when gaps in transparency take place, so that you have this means, this backup, if you will, to get the facts or to get the context right. And when journalism, or legacy journalism, I should say, begins to align with whatever division, however you want to put it, just to reinforce whatever message that they want to implement, then I could see. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of stating the obvious. Wow, this took a depressing turn really, really quick. So the path forward, like, once again, like, not that anyone has the magic wand, and certainly this takes a long time. Like, what are some of the easy small wins that can be achieved to help fix it? Like, what are some small stuff that, relatively speaking, isn't that much of a lift?
In sort of this whole NGO academic kind of climate industrial space,
besides make you the top boss, right? So that's a quick win, but we're counting that out.
Well, I would say, so academics need to be better with their disclosures. Research scientists need to be better with their disclosures. And I would hate to say, like, and Congress needs to get involved. But like, Congress needs to get involved. Like, if they want to do, like, people are frustrated with the NGO situation, and it came, that whole gold bar thing. Oh my goodness, you know what I'm talking about?
No, what's the gold bar thing?
The gold bars over the Titanic. So like, there was, I don't know the name of the guy, but he was working at the EPA, and I mean, it was a shady situation. He ended up, the New York Times covered it recently, but like, somebody took an unauthorized video of him talking about the Biden administration just trying to push out IRA money as fast as possible. And that's how you ended up with this like billions of dollars going to NGOs that nobody ever heard of.
Yeah.
With all sorts of conflicts of interest. And then not so long ago, a couple months ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene had this big committee thing on it in Congress, and like, how could this be? And so but the whole thing is like her pointing to her and Republicans pointing to like how this is going on. And then Democrats saying like, well, let me point out all your conflicts of interest, test, like the people sitting on the witness panel. And like, if they actually want to do something about it though, like Congress can do something about it. Like a lot of the way that our NGOs are structured and the ability to move money around in ways that are not super favorable to an open, transparent, and like involved democracy is for them to change those rules so that it can't happen. So like Congress needs to step up a bit I'm sure you see it in energy where like it would be super helpful if they would establish policies that would stabilize what it is that we are doing for energy in our country.
I just had this conversation with a guest earlier. It's like the preemptive picking of winners and losers as opposed to figuring out like a set of goals that we want to achieve and then working backwards on how we're going to get there in the quickest, most efficient, and disciplined manner. Like they just don't do that. Now, once again, I mean, you can make the argument that some of the flaw is because like terms, like if you have a 4-year term, it's really a 2-year term because you spend the last 2-year terms, the last 2 years of the term, campaigning for the next 4. So there's the short-termism. But yeah, and I'm going away from like my question of asking for solutions and just presenting you with more problems. But short-termism is something that's such a big problem, particularly in the capital markets, right? Public markets. What do we do? Quarterly calls. Like you end your quarterly call and you prepare the next day for the next quarterly call. Like it's a really big problem. We have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that we get your profile stuff in. If people want to look up your Substack and your written material, where do they go?
Everything's jessicawinkle.substack.com. I want to say, WEI.
You wanted to say you're unsure?
Huh?
You're unsure? You want to say?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I think I'm like the worst with names and self-promotions. So it's jessicawinkle.substack.com.
Okay. And if someone's listening to this, the top 3 things, once again, we're pushing over an hour and this has been great. It's flown, but the top 3 things, right? If they're like, hey, I listened to this podcast, what are the top 3 things, because we covered so much, that you're trying to get into the public domain? It can be top 2.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to that there's well, I don't know that I have a top 3 things that I'm trying to push into the public domain.
One of them's got to be the transparency on conflict of interest.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that there's the top 3 things is that there are issues with conflicts of interest in science. That doesn't mean that there's no good science out there, but that the conflicts of interest are not well documented, particularly in the climate space. Mm-hmm. And that this has created sort of a spectacle and a industrial complex, if you will, between scientists, NGOs, and whatever sort of policy area they're talking about. You can see it. We didn't talk about this a lot, but you can see it a lot in the financial sector, all that stuff with ESG and all that. That's a mess.
That's a whole other podcast as well.
And that I think, and this is my hunch, is that it's not just American politics is a big part of this climate discussion, but my hunch is that maybe it has always been this way and I didn't know, but it's becoming more of like a geopolitical security issue. Where we had talked about it earlier, where you're seeing what happens when you undermine the energy supply quickly, and you're seeing it in Europe. And when you don't have energy, when you undermine the economy and you start creating instabilities in society and politics, and that's a real thing, and that's an issue for our own national security and stability. So I think it should be the way that we think about this needs to be broadened to not just be like, oh, those NGOs, they're so frustrating, or oh, those scientists, how could they say these things? And start looking at like the bigger picture, like what is happening with our relationships and our stability with our own country, politically, economically, and who gains from this, not, and like big picture, who gains, like not just like that person over there, that rich person, but like, I don't know, are other nations gaining from our persistent navel gazing? Like, smell. Like, so I think it needs to be a bigger picture discussion about how this stuff has gotten so bad and so vitriol that there's more to it.
I agree. I can't thank you enough for joining us. This was great. I didn't realize how fast time was flying on this. Would love to have you on again. But I would encourage everyone to check out your stuff. First of all, you're just a good writer. Second of all, the way that you lay out thought process is very intuitive and super easy to understand. But just want to thank you for coming on and looking forward to future conversations.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Perfect.